Hear us, O Lord, have mercy upon us.
Statio St Laurentium extra muros. The Roman Church gathers today beyond the ancient walls of the city along the Tiburtian Way, where the basilica of St Laurence-without-the-Walls rises above the catacombs that cradle the relics of one of Rome's most beloved martyrs. Here the stational liturgy draws the faithful not only to a church but to a memory of sacrifice, witness, and the victory of Christ over the powers of darkness. But the basilica itself stands upon sacred ground. Beneath its pavement lie the galleries of the catacomb of Syriaca, where Christians of the early centuries buried their dead and celebrated the mysteries of faith in secret. Constantine erected the first great basilica here in the 4th century, directly over the tomb of St Laurence, the deacon of the Roman Church who was martyred during the persecution of the Emperor Valerian in AD 258. Through the centuries the building has been enlarged and adorned, yet it retains the austere dignity of a church built over a grave, a reminder that the church is founded upon the witness of martyrs. The architecture itself speaks the language of the early church. The long nave, lined with ancient columns taken from Roman buildings, leads the eye toward the raised sanctuary where the confessio marks the resting place of the saint. Above it stands the ciborium, sheltering the altar, a structure that visually proclaims the unity of sacrifice. The martyr's offering of his life, and the Eucharistic sacrifice renewed upon the altar. The Pope alone traditionally celebrates Mass at this high altar, a privilege recalling the intimate link between the Roman pontiff and the martyr whose charity became legendary throughout the city. Around this sacred site are found some of the most ancient Christian images. In the catacombs below, simple frescoes portray scenes of salvation: Christ raising the dead, the faithful gathered in hope, and the humble symbols of early Christian belief. Among them are birds and vines, signs of life and resurrection. These modest drawings, made by hands that knew persecution, proclaim a quiet confidence in the triumph of Christ, even in the darkness of the catacombs. The light of faith was never extinguished. The liturgy of the Third Sunday of Lent resonates profoundly with this place. The introit begins with the words of the psalmist: "My eyes are ever towards the Lord, for he shall pluck my feet out of the snare." The pilgrim who stands here among the relics of the martyrs understands these words in a new way. Laurence himself kept his eyes fixed upon the Lord, even when the snares of the world closed around him. Arrested and commanded to surrender the treasures of the Church, he presented instead the poor and the suffering, declaring that they were the true riches of Christ's kingdom. For this witness he was condemned to death upon a gridiron, sealing his faith with heroic courage. The Gospel today presents Christ casting out a devil and proclaiming his authority over the kingdom of darkness. The scene reveals the deeper conflict underlying human history, the struggle between the dominion of evil and the liberating power of God. Christ describes the devil as a strong man guarding his house, but he himself is the stronger one who overcomes him and divides his spoils. The Church, gathered at the tomb of Laurence, sees this victory embodied in the martyrs. Their deaths are not defeats but triumphs, signs that the kingdom of God has already broken the power of evil. This theme of conflict and victory runs throughout the liturgy. St. Paul exhorts the faithful in the epistle to walk as the children of the light. The Christian life is not passive. It is a moral struggle in which the believer must renounce darkness and live in goodness, justice, and truth. Lent intensifies this battle. Through fasting, prayer, and charity, the Christian confronts the lingering shadows of sin within the soul. Here the witness of St. Laurence becomes particularly luminous. As a deacon, he served the Church through acts of charity, distributing alms and caring for the needy. When persecution came, he did not abandon that service, but fulfilled it completely. His martyrdom was the ultimate expression of the sacrificial love St. Paul describes. Christ hath loved us and delivered himself for us, an oblation and a sacrifice to God. The martyr imitates Christ by offering his life for the sake of the gospel. The ancient frescoes beneath the basilica reinforce this message. In their simple lines and faded colours, they depict the hope of resurrection and the promise of divine mercy. These images were not created for artistic glory, but for consolation. They reminded grieving Christians that death was not the end, that Christ had conquered the grave, and that those who remained faithful would share in his victory. The communion antiphon gives voice to this same hope. The sparrow hath found herself a house, and the turtle dove a nest, where she may lay her young. Thy altars, O Lord of hosts. The Christian wandering through the trials of life finally discovers a home at the altar of God. In the Basilica of St Laurence, this image becomes tangible. The faithful gather at the altar built above the martyr's tomb, where heaven and earth meet in a Eucharistic sacrifice. Thus the stational pilgrimage to this basilica becomes more than a historical remembrance. It is an invitation to spiritual renewal. Standing where the martyrs once prayed, the Christian is reminded that the struggle described in the Gospel continues within every soul. The enemy still seeks to reclaim the house from which he was driven. If the soul is left empty, swept and garnished as Christ warns, evil may return with greater force. But if it is filled with faith, charity, and the grace of the sacraments, it becomes a dwelling place for God himself. Lent, therefore, calls the faithful to vigilance. Like St. Laurence, the Christian must hold fast to Christ in the midst of conflict. The fasting of these days disciplines the body, the prayers of the liturgy lift the heart toward heaven, and acts of charity imitate the love that defined the martyr's life. In this sacred place beyond the ancient walls, where the Church gathers around the relics of a deacon who gave everything for Christ, the meaning of Lent becomes clear. The Christian life is a battle, but it is a battle already won by the stronger one, Christ the Lord, and those who remain faithful to him, like St. Laurence, will share in his triumph.